The year was 1945. The war in Europe had finally ended, and American soldiers were tasked with processing thousands of German prisoners of war. It was exhausting, repetitive work, checking papers, searching for weapons, documenting names. But one young American soldier would never forget April 27, 1945. Among the endless lines of defeated German soldiers, stood a woman. Not unusual, by the war's end, Germany had mobilized women into auxiliary roles, even combat positions. But when the American soldier moved to search her for contraband, she flinched violently and gasped words that would haunt him for decades: Bitte, brennt, wenn, berühren. Please. It burns when you touch it. What he discovered beneath her Wehrmacht uniform wasn't a hidden weapon or stolen valuables. It was something far more disturbing, a secret that revealed one of World War II's most overlooked tragedies. A story of survival, suffering, and the desperate final days of the Third Reich. This is that story. To understand what happened to this woman, we need to go back just a few weeks earlier, to March and early April 1945. By this point, Nazi Germany was collapsing from all sides. The Soviet Red Army was pushing from the east, having already crossed into German territory. American, British, and Canadian forces advanced from the west. Hitler, delusional and hidden in his Berlin bunker, refused to surrender. But here's what most people don't know: as the Third Reich crumbled, the Nazi regime became more brutal, not less. In October 1944, Hitler had ordered the creation of the Volkssturm, a people's militia that conscripted every male between 16 and 60 who wasn't already serving. But by March 1945, even this wasn't enough. The regime began pulling women from auxiliary services and assigning them to increasingly dangerous roles. Enter the Flakhelferinnen, female anti-aircraft auxiliaries, and the Nachrichtenhelferinnen, communications assistants. These women, some as young as 15, were thrust into combat zones with minimal training and even less protection. The woman our American soldier encountered. Her name was recorded only as Margarete K. One of approximately 450,000 German women serving in military auxiliary roles by war's end. Now, here's where the story takes a darker turn. As Allied forces advanced, they began liberating concentration camps and occupied territories. What they found shocked even battle-hardened veterans: mass starvation, disease, and evidence of systematic atrocities. But there was another epidemic that received far less attention, one that affected both civilians and military personnel on all sides: untreated burns, infections, and injuries that soldiers and auxiliaries were forced to hide. Margarete K's injury wasn't from combat in the traditional sense. According to the American soldier's later testimony, documented in the National Archives, she had suffered severe phosphorus burns across her torso and arms. Phosphorus bombs were used extensively by Allied forces during the bombing campaigns of German cities. These weren't like conventional explosives. White phosphorus ignites on contact with oxygen and burns at approximately 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It sticks to skin, clothing, and continues burning until oxygen is cut off. The bombing of Dresden in February 1945 created firestorms that killed an estimated 25,000 people. Hamburg's firebombing in 1943 killed over 40,000. But thousands more survived with devastating injuries, burns that never properly healed, that became infected, that caused chronic pain for the rest of their lives. Margarete had been stationed in Würzburg when American bombers hit the city on March 16, 1945. Over 90% of the city center was destroyed in just 20 minutes. She survived, but barely. So why was Margarete still in uniform, still at her post, with injuries so severe she could barely move? This is where we see the true horror of the Nazi regime's final days. By April 1945, desertion meant immediate execution. The SS and military police roamed behind German lines, hanging anyone, soldier or civilian, suspected of defeatism. Thousands of German soldiers were executed by their own military in the war's final months, more than in the entire rest of the war combined. For women in military service, the situation was even more precarious. Margarete couldn't seek proper medical treatment because that would mean admitting she couldn't serve. She couldn't desert because, as a woman in uniform, she'd be immediately conspicuous. And she couldn't surrender, because until the Americans actually arrived, she was trapped between two terrors, the Allied bombs and her own military police. So she wrapped her burns in whatever cloth she could find, took what painkillers she could scavenge, and stayed at her post. When the American soldier discovered her injuries, he immediately called for a medic. According to his account, written decades later, the makeshift bandages had fused with her wounds. The burns had become infected. She was suffering from both fever and likely sepsis. The medic who treated her estimated she'd been living with these injuries for approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks of unimaginable pain, hidden beneath a uniform, because showing weakness meant death. She told them, through an interpreter, that she wasn't alone. Dozens of other women in her unit were hiding similar injuries, illnesses and trauma, all too terrified to seek help. Margarete's story isn't unique, it's just one of the few that was documented. After the war ended, Allied forces processed millions of German POWs. Medical examinations revealed a staggering level of untreated injuries, diseases, and trauma among both male and female prisoners. Many had been serving while suffering from tuberculosis, typhus, malnutrition, and severe wounds. But here's what makes this even more complex: while we must acknowledge the suffering of individuals like Margarete, we also can't ignore the context. These same German forces had participated in, or supported, a regime responsible for genocide, the deaths of over 40 million people, and untold suffering across Europe. The concentration camp guards, the soldiers who carried out massacres, the administrators who organized deportations, many of them also became POWs in 1945. History isn't simple. Margarete was both a victim of the Nazi regime's cruelty to its own people and part of the military machine that enabled that regime's atrocities. The American soldier who discovered her injury later wrote that this realization, this complicated, uncomfortable truth, stayed with him forever. He'd shown her compassion in that moment, ensured she received medical treatment. But he also had to reconcile that with everything he'd seen and fought against. In the decades after the war, Margarete's fate remains unknown. Like millions of German women who served in auxiliary roles, she disappeared into history, likely returned to what remained of her home, carried those scars for the rest of her life, and never spoke of it again. It burns when you touch it. 4 words that revealed a hidden world of suffering in the final days of World War II. Margarete K's story reminds us that war's cruelty doesn't discriminate. It destroys combatants and civilians, victors and vanquished. It forces impossible choices and creates suffering that extends far beyond the battlefield. But it also reminds us why we study history, not to simplify it, not to choose comfortable narratives, but to understand the full, complicated truth of human experience. The American soldier who documented this encounter did so because he believed these stories mattered. That even in the midst of processing enemy POWs, even after fighting through one of history's most brutal wars, individual moments of humanity still counted. We may never know what happened to Margarete after she received treatment. We don't know if she made it home, if her burns ever fully healed, or how she carried the weight of those experiences. But we know her story. And now, so do you. If this story affected you, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the untold stories of World War II. Drop a comment below. What other overlooked aspects of World War II history should we explore? And remember, history isn't just about the big battles and famous leaders. Sometimes, it's about a moment of pain, a whispered phrase, and a hidden wound that revealed a larger truth. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.